From politics to the schools reopening debate, Kenya National Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers KUPPET is calling on parents to prepare to take their children back to school sooner than January next year. KUPPET Secretary General Akelo Misori urged the government to consider reopening learning institutions in October this year for the second academic term, following what he terms as a drop in COVID-19 cases. Misori is part of the task force tasked by the Ministry of Education to formulate coronavirus protocols before schools are reopened. The team is expected to hand over its report to Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha on Monday.
With debate still ongoing on whether to reopen schools before the end of the year or not, the Kenya National Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers KUPPET says it is now safe for learning to resume. KUPPET Secretary General Akelo Misori says based on the current trend of low coronavirus infections in the country, the Ministry of Education should reconsider its earlier advisory.
Let us take that first term was already done. Let us start from whichever, but at term 2 and then go to term 3. And then we should not miss our whole calendar academic year. So once we do that, we can now reprogram ourselves on how to ensure that we make up for the lost time, which of course teachers have the capacity to do.
Misori at the same time called on the government to support private schools to resume physical classes, since most of them are grappling with limited space for expansion. Misori is a member of an education stakeholders task force mandated to formulate a strategy of how best learners can go back to school without exposure to COVID-19. Among issues that have posed a challenge is social distancing, even as the government has rolled out an ambitious plan to supply public schools with furniture at a cost of 1.9 billion shillings to facilitate the same.
It will just require reorganizing. We may not need, but then in cases where it is difficult, like boarding schools, why can't they hire tents? If they can hire tents for funerals, why don't we hire tents for learning? This thing is possible. Boards of management must think within the box and outside the box too, to even hire tents for a shorter period for us to realize our objective.
Another contentious issue is the academic calendar, which traditionally begins in January and ends in November. This means reopening in October will call for amendment to the learning schedule.
People have been at home. We can go back even after 2 weeks. We go back to start that term. And then by May we do exams. What will be wrong if you open the schools in June? What will be wrong? Or earlier than that, depending on what the technical officers at the Ministry of Education now work on. You know, our work as in the task force is not basically to provide the actual dates. We are just bringing in the scenarios which can work, and that one forms the policy framework through which the minister can work with.
National examinations for Standard 8 and Form 4 students, normally held between October and November annually, is another factor that needs thorough analysis. The task force is expected to hand over its recommendations to Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha on Monday. Schools in Kenya were indefinitely closed March this year after the first case of COVID-19 was reported. In July, Professor George Magoha said the 2020 academic year was considered lost and learning will resume in January 2021. He further said learners, including the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education and the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education candidates, will repeat the current classes.